Hello, my name is Thayer Period, and here is how I remade the beat to Walk In by Amiri, originally produced by Mowz Mista. The first thing I recreated was this sign lead. Shocker, I made this in Serum. Here's what it sounds like with no effects. This is a pretty basic sound. We just have two oscillators, both sine waves at the same pitch, and our second oscillator is turned all the way down. And we are using the second oscillator to FM our first oscillator, and we're using about 19% FM, so it's not a very heavy FM, but it gives it just a little bit more like body to the sound. Like I'll show you kind of as we turn it up from zero how it affects the original sine wave. Not super noticeable, but it does add some nice higher harmonics and helps kind of like distinguish the sound from the background. For our volume envelope, we just have our attack around 2.4 milliseconds and then a little bit of release so the sound doesn't immediately cut off and has a nice fade out. And we also are set to mono, legato, and we have about 58 milliseconds of portamento, so there is a nice glide going on. Now moving on to the effects, we just have some soft clipping. Not very noticeable, but again, helps bring the sound forward more. Then we are just boosting in our EQ around 2K hertz, just a 6 dB boost, and then cutting some low end that we don't need. Finally, we add some reverb, just to give it some nice atmosphere. Then for our mixer effects, we just have an OTT on 8%, boosting our highs and mids a little bit, compressing the sound a little. Then finally an EQ, scooping out some kind of gross frequencies around 329. And again, cutting our lows that don't need to be there. Next sound I added was this other sine lead. Again, this is a super simple sound. Here's what it sounds like with no effects. Pretty much almost identical to what is happening with our first sound. We just have slightly less glide and we are not actually FMing our first sine wave. But again, it is a sine sound with some glide and then a little bit of release on our volume envelope with a little bit of attack. There's a bit of a faster glide because as you can see in our piano roll, the notes play pretty quickly. So we have a faster glide so you can actually hear those pitches instead of it all being kind of one like slidey mess. Like if we turn up the portamento, you hear it gets kind of gross. For effects, we're just doing some soft clipping. And then an EQ to cut out extra high end and low end. For our mixer effects, we just have an OTT on 16%, boosting our high end and cutting our mids and our lows a bit. Then finishing it off with an EQ, just cutting everything below 324 and then boosting around 1K. Next sound I added was this pad. I remade this in Serum, but there's also some extra stuff going on that I will get into. So here's how this pad sounds with no effects. Pretty simple, but there is a decent amount of post-processing going on. So we have two saw waves. The second one is pitched down an octave, and this first one is left at 0. And we are adding 16 voices of unison to both of them with the detune turned down a little bit. So we're making this a super wide sound, because you really want pads to be nice and wide. So this is a great tool when making pads is using unison. For our volume envelope, we just have a little bit of attack, and then we have a very gradual fade out with our release around 866 milliseconds, and then a decent amount of decay and sustain just so it really fades out. We want it to be very subtle. Pads aren't supposed to be sharp and have like nice transients. It's supposed to be a very subtle like fade in, fade out. You don't notice it, but it's just there in the background creating atmosphere. For effects, we start by adding this hyper. Again, just adding more detune. Then I added an EQ to cut the extra low and high end. Next, I added some chorus and kind of tweaked everything to get it to sound a little wider. Then we have a pretty basic delay. Then I added a reverb and cranked the mix up all the way to 100% and increased our size and decay to make it even more washed out. Now for our mixer effects, I started by adding an OTT on 30%. Kind of just pulling everything forward, and then I finished that off by adding a Valhalla room on 100% again. A very, very good reverb. But you may be noticing that this does not sound exactly like the pad in the song. There's something missing. That's because there's actually another layer I did not talk about in the short version of this video. So here's how I created that extra layer. I started by recording our pad into Edison. Then I clicked here and then went to our harmonic blur option. Next, I sent that to our pattern view, and here's what we got. Super beautiful. One of the most underrated tools in FL Studio, in my opinion, is the harmonic blur thing. I don't think enough people use it. I use it in literally every beat I have ever made because it just sounds gorgeous every goddamn time. Like, you can't go wrong with it. Then for that pad, I just used this No More Boring Pads preset in RC20 with a little bit of tweaking to make it a bit wider. Then I just finished it off with a micro shift to make it even wider. So here's both of those pads layered together. Next, we have our bell. This is just the digitubular bell impurity. It's not the exact bell used in the song, but I thought it was pretty close. For effect processing, I just used an OTT on 18% to kind of bring everything forward. Then just a nice long reverb to kind of give it a nice fade out. Now we have our 808s. I am using the Mowz 808. And for effect processing, I'm just using a sausage fattener on 8% for the fatness and 7% on the color to just give it some nice saturation. Here's with and without. Finally, we have our drums. Pretty basic, we just have this classic trap snare, this open hi-hat, this filtered clap, then our hi-hats. The one interesting thing going on with our hi-hats is there's actually, I'm pretty sure, a delay on the original hi-hats in the song, so I recreated that by using velocity controls. So after some of our main hi-hat hits, there are actually quieted down hi-hat hits that sound almost like an echo. It creates a very nice contrast and really sounds like a delay, but this is a more precise way of kind of recreating that effect. I also chucked a little bit of a reverb on our hi-hats, then bussed all our drums to a drum bus where I'm running them through Pro C2 Groovy Glue preset, a very good drum compression preset, and then our drum puncher preset in Radiator with the mix around 50%. And that is everything. If you want access to all of the serum presets and samples and project file from this remake or any of my 145 plus other remakes, those are available on my Patreon for a very reasonable price. I will chuck the link on screen right now. It's a great way to support me. Also, it is a great way to get sounds if you are a music producer looking for some new presets or some new drums or some new mixing techniques or really anything. There's like over 400 serum presets, and all of those serum presets are also rendered out to one-shots for people who don't have serum. I got you guys, you're covered. Hopefully this was helpful and interesting and informative. Peace.